Imagine you've spent, I don't know, $1 trillion building this ultimate, completely impenetrable toll booth on the only major highway in town.
Right. Total monopoly.
Exactly. You control who comes in, who goes out, who pays. You're the undisputed master of all the traffic.
Sounds pretty good.
It does. But then, you wake up one morning, you look out the window, and you realize your biggest rival has just quietly built this high-speed subterranean bullet train that entirely bypasses your highway.
Oh, well. So your toll booth is just useless now.
Yeah. It's not broken. It's just completely irrelevant.
And that is the exact nightmare scenario that is currently keeping military strategists awake at night.
Yeah.
Because when we look at global conflicts, we're sort of conditioned to see things geographically, right? Like a border skirmish here or a contested strait over there.
Right. The visible stuff.
Exactly. But beneath those visible conflicts is this entirely different, much bigger battle for the underlying architecture of global power.
And mapping out that hidden architecture is our mission for today. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We are spending our time today unpacking a single, just incredibly dense source. It's some excerpts from a recent Tucker Carlson interview with Colonel Wilkerson.
Yeah, and this conversation is just a massive, sweeping look at the shifting balance of power. I mean, they get into hidden international infrastructure, the weaponization of global finance, the deep psychology of the American empire.
And some frankly alarming internal fractures within the U.S. military, too.
Right. It is a vast web of claims. And our goal today is to kind of pull on those threads to see how they all connect. Like, how does a bombed railroad in the Middle East connect to the actual value of the dollars in your bank account?
Yeah.
How does artificial intelligence tie into religious extremism in the armed forces?
Which sounds crazy until you hear the argument. But before we jump in, we need to make a really crucial disclaimer for you listeners.
Very important, yeah.
This interview contains some highly politically charged viewpoints. I mean, Wilkerson levels intense, systemic criticisms at multiple nations, political leaders, historical figures.
He really doesn't hold back.
No, he doesn't. So to be absolutely clear, we are not taking sides here. We are not validating or endorsing these claims. Our job today is strictly analytical. We are just impartially unpacking the mechanics of these arguments because, honestly, the worldview they present is fascinating, provocative, and highly influential.
Exactly. We're essentially looking at the blueprints of his argument just to understand how all these pieces fit together.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at that first piece, the physical battlefield. Because the interview kicks off by looking at this specific, seemingly isolated event, the U.S. and Israel bombing a newly completed railroad in Iran.
Right.
And on the surface, that looks like, standard Middle East tactical warfare. But Wilkerson argues this is actually a desperate attempt to stop a massive shift in global trade.
Right, because this isn't just any railroad. It's a critical artery of China's Belt and Road Initiative. The framework presented here suggests that China is orchestrating a fundamental shift in how goods move around the entire planet. They're trying to shift from the sea to the land. This specific railroad connects China's Pacific ports, overland, through the Persian Gulf, across the Caucasus, and right into the heart of Europe.
Well, let's talk about the specific numbers he mentions because they are staggering.
Yeah.
We are talking about taking a maritime shipping route that currently takes anywhere from 2.5 to 3 days.
And is heavily exposed to threats, yeah.
Right. And replacing it with a terrestrial route that gets cargo into Europe in just 16 hours.
16 hours. And the why behind this is what really matters. See, the United States projects its global hegemony primarily through maritime dominance.
The Navy.
Right. The U.S. Navy basically polices the global commons. They control all the vital choke points, right? The Suez Canal, the Strait of Hormuz, the Bab el-Mandeb.
Yeah.
So if you want to move massive cargo globally, you pretty much have to do it on the water, which means you're doing it with the tacit permission of the U.S. Navy.
Which goes right back to my toll booth analogy. If China moves its primary commercial arteries off the oceans and onto these high-speed rail networks stretching all across Eurasia, those maritime choke points totally lose their leverage.
Exactly.
You completely neutralize the U.S. Navy without ever having to fire a single torpedo at an American ship.
It's brilliant. And Wilkerson draws this really compelling historical parallel here. To illustrate why overland routes are so decisive, he points back to World War II.
Oh, right.
Yeah. During the war, the U.S. and Britain recognized that the sea routes to supply the Soviet Union were just too slow and incredibly vulnerable to German U-boats.
Right.
So they essentially sneaked into Iran, which, by the way, had strong Nazi sympathies at the time, and they built a massive overland supply route.
Just to get supplies up into Stalingrad.
Precisely. They pushed hundreds of thousands of trucks and heavy implements of war straight up through the belly of the Soviet Union. And Wilkerson argues that Soviets would not have held Stalingrad without that specific terrestrial route.
Oh.
So the historical lesson here is that secure overland logistics actually win wars. Fast forward to today, and by bombing this new railroad in Iran, the Pentagon is sending a very kinetic message to Beijing. They're saying, we see your terrestrial strategy, and we are not going to let you bypass our maritime control.
But if you're China, and you know the U.S. Navy can disrupt your physical trade, what is your next move? The interview suggests that physical infrastructure is merely the opening gambit.
Just step one.
Right. The real kill shot is financial. Which brings us to the second massive topic they cover, which is de-dollarization.
Right, because if you can't entirely escape the physical reach of an empire, you have to dismantle its financial engine.
Yeah.
According to Wilkerson, this isn't some brand new pivot either. It's the culmination of a multi-generational strategy that actually dates all the way back to Deng Xiaoping.
Wow. Yeah.
The ultimate objective has always been to defeat the United States without ever engaging in a hot war. And recently, Xi Jinping allegedly issued this edict, stating that China has leveled the playing field in almost every domain except one.
Financial dominance.
Exactly. Financial dominance.
And by financial dominance, we are specifically talking about the weaponization of the U.S. dollar. Because Wilkerson points out that China wants to substitute the dollar with the renminbi as the global transactional and reserve currency.
Right.
And their goal is aiming for like 60 to 70% global usage. But I want to pause here for a second and just dig into the mechanism of how this actually works. Why does the currency itself matter so much to national security?
It's all about the SWIFT banking system.
Okay.
SWIFT is essentially the secure messaging nervous system that allows global banks to talk to each other and clear their transactions. And because the U.S. dollar is the global reserve currency, the United States effectively controls those clearinghouses.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if a country does something the U.S. dislikes, the U.S. can just cut them out of the SWIFT system entirely.
Which means what, exactly?
It means that countries suddenly cannot buy oil, they can't sell their exports, they can't even purchase medicine on the global market. It's an absolute economic death sentence.
The ultimate sanction. Which leads to one of the most chilling claims in this entire interview. Wilkerson argues that U.S. financial sanctions have killed 38 million people since the turn of the century.
38 million. And he deliberately compares that death toll to Stalin's purges and Mao's Cultural Revolution.
That is an intense comparison.
It really is. He specifically points to the sanctions placed on Saddam Hussein's Iraq in the 1990s. The claim is that those sanctions directly caused the deaths of 500,000 Iraqi children.
500,000 kids.
Yeah. Mostly due to a lack of basic medicines and water purification equipment that they couldn't buy because of the sanctions.
And he references that infamous 1996 interview with Madeleine Albright, right, where she was asked about those 500,000 dead children.
Yeah, that interview.
And she replied on national television, "We think the price is worth it."
What's fascinating here is that this is exactly the psychological leverage China is using right now. Wilkerson notes that China goes to countries in the global south and frames the elimination of the U.S. dollar as this altruistic purpose.
Oh, wow. So not just a business deal.
Exactly. They aren't just saying, hey, use our money instead of theirs. They are saying, let's dismantle the financial weapon that the United States uses to indiscriminately starve 30% of the globe.
That is quite the pitch. But okay, I have to push back here, or at least ask the obvious question that comes to mind. If China's entire master plan is to win without fighting, just, quietly laying train tracks and swapping out currencies, why does Wilkerson argue that there are factions within the United States government that actively want to provoke a conflict?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Like, why not just counter China economically?
Well, this is where the interview takes a deep dive into the psychology of empire. Why does a massive, diverse superpower act the way it does? Wilkerson claims that figures like Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld fundamentally wanted a Cold War, or even a hot war, with China.
Why?
Not because they misunderstood China's economic threat, but because an external enemy is literally the only gravitational force strong enough to hold the American empire together.
You're talking about the Iron Mountain concept.
Yes. The interview references the report from Iron Mountain. Now, Historians debate whether this document was a genuine, leaked government study or just a brilliant piece of political satire.
Right.
But honestly, regardless of its origin, the core thesis it presents is foundational to Wilkerson's argument here. The premise is that peace is actually destabilizing for an empire.
Wait, peace is destabilizing.
Yeah. The idea is that a massive, complex society requires a terrifying external enemy just to justify enormous taxes, enforce domestic obedience, and keep the military-industrial complex profitable. Without a villain, the diverse factions of the empire will just turn inward and tear each other apart.
So the argument goes that endless global tension isn't a failure of American diplomacy. It is an intentional structural requirement for domestic survival.
Yep.
That is a staggeringly dark view of governance. And Wilkerson actually ties this exact psychological framework to the JFK assassination, doesn't he?
He does.
Yeah.
And remember, Wilkerson frames this from his perspective as an expert in weaponry and ballistics. He states outright that he doesn't believe Lee Harvey Oswald could have physically made those shots.
Right.
So he argues that JFK was assassinated by a loose coalition of dissenters, basically elements within the CIA, the Mafia, and the Pentagon. And the motive wasn't some specific policy dispute. It was that JFK was genuinely pursuing peace.
Because after the Cuban Missile Crisis, he had seen how close the world came to the brink.
Right. Wilkerson brings up JFK's American University speech and his handling of the Berlin crisis. JFK was pushing for a true rapprochement with the Soviet Union and Cuba. He really wanted to dial down the existential dread.
But according to that Iron Mountain logic.
Exactly. If you eliminate the external threat, the empire collapses.
Right.
So structurally, the system simply could not allow JFK to succeed.
Man. Wilkerson even compares this moment in American history to the fall of the Roman Republic. He brings up Mary Beard's book, 12 Caesars, and he draws a direct line from Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon, which, effectively killed the Republic and birthed the autocratic empire, to the modern United States.
Yeah, the parallel is really strong.
His implication is that once the U.S. lost the unifying threat of the Soviet Union, it crossed its own Rubicon. We transitioned from a republic into an empire in decline, and he says this leads to systemic corruption. He even throws out names like Jeffrey Epstein as symptoms of imperial depravity.
But an empire in decline doesn't just rot quietly, right? It lashes out to secure its perimeter. And this brings us out of historical theory and directly into the real-world flashpoint of the Middle East, specifically looking at Israel and Lebanon.
Right, because theory eventually hits reality. Wilkerson presents a highly critical analysis of Israel's current and historical strategy in the Levant. He argues that when the IDF bombs Lebanon, they aren't just targeting military installations.
Right.
They deliberately target the basic economic infrastructure, dry cleaners, hotels, restaurants, civilian logistics.
And the mechanism behind this, according to him, is pure economic warfare. The interview frames this as a deliberate strategy to prevent Lebanon from ever rebuilding its middle class.
So keeping them down economically.
Exactly. If Lebanon returns to its historical status as the pearl of the Eastern Mediterranean, it becomes a viable economic rival. By keeping Lebanon functionally broken, Israel maintains absolute economic dominance in the region.
But Wilkerson doesn't think this strategy is sustainable. He makes a massive demographic prediction here. He argues that Israel will not survive long-term as a Jewish state.
Yeah, that's a huge claim.
Not because of a military defeat, but just because of sheer demographics and population shifts. He claims the only path forward for its survival in the Levant is transitioning into a true secular democracy representing all residents equally, which is something he asserts the current leadership absolutely refuses to entertain.
And the United States is deeply entrenched in this entire regional powder keg. Wilkerson points to the sheer scale of the U.S. presence there, specifically the massive embassy complex built in Beirut.
Yeah, why is it so big?
Well, he argues it is not really a diplomatic center. It is a fortified haven. He calls it the largest in the world, specifically built for housing Mossad, MI6, and the CIA.
Wow.
It's essentially a massive intelligence and operational fortress pointing directly at Russian and Chinese interests in the Eastern Mediterranean.
And all of this geopolitical maneuvering is basically sitting on top of an economic fault line. Wilkerson introduces this terrifying timeline for the global economy regarding the current shipping disruptions in the Red Sea and beyond.
Yeah, the doomsday clock.
Exactly. He essentially says that if maritime shipping isn't fully restored and normalized by June, we're looking at a guaranteed global recession, and if it bleeds into August, we enter a global depression.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, to understand why the global supply chain is that fragile. Wilkerson shares this story about a 2009 global simulation he participated in over in Beijing.
Okay.
It was an oil disruption exercise. They simulated a catastrophic attack taking down the Ras Tanura oil facility in Saudi Arabia.
And the immediate domino effect was just absolute panic. In the simulation, the price of oil instantly spiked to $200 a barrel.
Instantly.
But it wasn't just the price. The physical mechanism of trade stopped. Insurers refused to insure cargo ships, and without insurance, shipping companies simply refused to sail.
Right.
Wilkerson notes that the Chinese delegation was so panicked by the cascading effects in this game that they literally walked off the game floor to consult their actual Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
But the crucial takeaway from that 2009 simulation, how the crisis was actually resolved.
How did they fix it?
Everyone in the room, and that includes China and Russia, agreed to let the United States Navy step in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the U.S. mobilized allied forces, cleared the straits, parked an aircraft carrier in the region, and that unilateral display of American maritime dominance calmed the markets, and the insurers started issuing policies again.
The implication being, the U.S. was the undisputed global security guard in 2009. But today, with the rise of drone warfare, hypersonic missiles, and these new terrestrial trade routes, the U.S. might no longer have the undisputed authority or even the physical capacity to unilaterally secure the seas.
Exactly.
And if the U.S. can't calm the markets, the supply chain breaks.
Which brings this right to your doorstep.
Right.
This isn't just about some ships in the Red Sea. If the supply chain freezes, the price of literally everything on your grocery store shelves skyrockets. Manufacturing halts. And in that moment of global chaos, China accelerates its push to make the renminbi the safe haven currency, which collapses the U.S. dollar.
So what does this all mean? We have this empire desperately trying to manage shifting trade routes, a financial coup, explosive regional wars. But Wilkerson argues that while the outer walls are being battered, the internal foundation of the U.S. is fracturing under the weight of two massive, completely opposing forces.
It is a profound societal cognitive dissonance, because on one side you have the bleeding edge of technological advancement, artificial intelligence.
Right.
Wilkerson teaches at GW and William and Mary, and he notes this extreme existential anxiety among his top-tier students. They aren't just worried about AI taking their jobs, they are terrified of a total loss of human autonomy.
He shares this incredibly unsettling anecdote about a prominent AI developer who supposedly received a phone call from his own AI.
Yeah, that gave me chills.
Right. The program was just checking in on him. It wasn't prompted. It was the AI exhibiting independent agency. And Wilkerson argues this triggered an epiphany that humanity is rapidly creating systemic tools that we simply lack the wisdom to manage or control.
The fear is that our physical and financial infrastructure will soon be governed by these black box algorithms that just operate completely outside of human democratic oversight.
Yeah.
But then Wilkerson juxtaposes that hypermodern tech threat with a radical ideological regression happening within the very institution tasked with defending the country, the U.S. military.
This is the ideological threat. Wilkerson specifically points to a figure named Hegseth, accusing him and others of actively trying to transform the military into a defender of a very specific, aggressive brand of Christianity.
And Wilkerson details exactly how this shift is being engineered.
It's wild.
It starts with recruitment.
Yeah.
See, Congress has strict caps on what are called mental category 4 recruits.
What does that mean?
These are individuals who score very low, basically between the 10th and 30th percentile on the military entrance exams. Congress capped their recruitment at 4% just to maintain a certain standard of intellectual capability within the ranks.
But Wilkerson claims the military has secretly pushed that number up to 11%. And how do they do it? By creating what he calls a school within the Army.
Right.
They aren't raising the recruits' actual educational level. They're literally just teaching them how to memorize the test. Once they pass, the military circumvents the congressional cap.
And why would leadership want to lower the intellectual standards of the military?
Well,
Wilkerson suggests it's to fill the ranks with highly malleable, compliant soldiers who just won't question orders.
yeah.
And he claims this vulnerability is being actively exploited by religious extremists. He describes recruits being baptized in a river at Fort Jackson and being explicitly told by chaplains that their primary identity is a soldier for Christ.
And it's not just isolated to basic training either.
Yeah.
Wilkerson cites an instance where Franklin Graham was invited to give a sermon right in the center courtyard of the Pentagon.
Wow.
And he wasn't preaching about peace. Wilkerson claims he was advocating for Old Testament-style holy war, literally invoking the destruction of men, women, and children. And Wilkerson, who identifies as a Christian himself, views this as a profound corruption.
Yeah.
He argues it is actively turning the military away from its constitutional oath and reshaping it for a religious crusade.
Just think about the internal tension that creates within a single society. You have the technological elite building autonomous systems that strip away human agency entirely. And simultaneously, the ground forces of the empire are being conditioned with medieval holy war ideologies that demand absolute, unquestioning fervor.
How does a country survive when its head is in the AI clouds and its fists are fighting a 12th century crusade? Let's bring this all together because the sheer scale of the picture Wilkerson and Carlson paint is breathtaking. If this analysis holds any water, we are watching the real-time collision of global macrosystems.
Absolutely. We are seeing physical trade routes literally moving from the ocean to the land to neutralize the U.S. Navy.
Yeah.
We're watching the global financial system actively plotting to dethrone the U.S. dollar just to disarm America's sanction power.
We see the deep psychology of an imperial state that requires the terror of an external enemy just to keep its citizens paying taxes.
Right. And internally, we see a society fracturing between the cold autonomy of artificial intelligence and the burning extremism of religious nationalism in the military.
And for you listening, the stakes couldn't be clearer. This isn't just theoretical debate. If the dollar loses its reserve status, that immediately impacts inflation, your 401k, and your daily purchasing power. If the shipping lanes close and the doomsday clock hits August, you will feel it at the gas pump and the grocery store in a matter of weeks. The underlying architecture of the world you live in is shifting.
This raises an important question, which brings us to a final, incredibly sobering thought that Wilkerson leaves us with. He observes that in 5,000 years of recorded human history, we have seen countless empires rise and fall.
Right.
But never, in all of those millennia, has an empire possessed the technological means to completely destroy itself and the entire world around it. Until today.
So if the Iron Mountain theory is right, and an empire truly needs an external enemy to survive, what happens when the weapons built to fight that enemy become entirely autonomous? Or what happens when the soldiers operating those apocalyptic weapons are driven by absolute religious zealotry rather than loyalty to a constitution?
The most dangerous enemy an empire faces might not be a foreign nation building a railroad or a coalition of banks creating a new currency.
No.
The fatal blow might just be its own desperate, destructive attempts to hold on to power as the foundations crack from within.